Welcome to Sports for Beginners. This is the show where I cover the Pittsburgh Penguins, Toronto Blue Jays, and take you on a journey through the world of sports. From the fans' perspective, here is your host, Scott McGregor. Let's have some fun. Hello, everybody. Welcome to PWHL Recap here on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. My name is Scott McGregor. Our topic of conversation is the Toronto Sceptres versus the Montreal Victoire. It is Thursday, February 5th, 2026, as we record this for you. But we are focused on the game between the Victoire and the Sceptres that took place on the final night before the Oulmpic break began for the PWHL. A few things to note before we get down to business. On this show, we will start off by talking about the records for both squads, Toronto and Montreal in this case, going in to their showdown, who the head coaches are, as well as take you between the pipes and get you a look at the officiating crew. In our second half of the show, we will dive into the hockey game itself, from the first period to the second period to the third period, etc. And time permitting, we will also dive right into our game stats. And then a little bit later, we will talk 3 stars of the game, women's hockey player of the game, play of the game, go around the league if there's time. And there was some news that broke on this very special day, January 28, 2026, which is the day of the matchup we are talking about, where all 8 teams for the first time in PWHL history competed on the exact same night in what the PWHL was calling the ultimate send-off. All right, folks, I say we get a move on here and get down to business. Throughout most of this show, although you may not be able to see it very well since we are recording on Zoom, we will be sharing our screen, so I will try my very best to articulate most of what we talk about on this show. But without further ado, let's get right down to business. It is important to note that both teams, as we begin the show, they came in, I should say, to this game at records of 4-1, 3 and 7 for Toronto. Their last game prior to this one was against the Vancouver Golden Knights, which they lost by a final score of 5-0. That was on January 22nd, 2026. Daryl Watts is the team's top scorer, and in 14 games played leading up to the 15th game of the season, which was against Montreal, Daryl had 6 goals, 5 assists, and 11 points in total. Top scorer for the Montreal Victoire, who opened up this game in 3rd place in the PWHL standings, coming in, had a record of 6-3-0-5 and 24 points. Their top scorer is Captain Clutch herself, Marie-Philippe Poulin. 14 games played for Marie-Philippe Poulin, and she has 6 goals, 7 assists, and 13 points as a result in 14 games. The recent game before this game, which was the 4th, yes, you heard me, 4th of 5 matches between Toronto and Montreal this year. They will meet again on March 3rd, but more on that later on. Montreal's latest win before the win heading into the Oulmpic break was a 3-1 victory over the Ottawa Charge on January 24th, 2026, excuse me. We're not in 2025 anymore, we're in 2026. This will be the first head-to-head series to reach 4 meetings between 2 PWHL teams this season. The Victoire have picked up wins in play spell in Laval of 3-1 and in Halifax 2-1 in the shootout against Toronto before Toronto earned a 2-1 win at the home of the Montreal Canadiens of the NHL in the Bell Center in one of their previous matchups. The Sceptres have one win in 4 visits to Place Bell. Their record at Place Bell is 1-0-1-2. Broke a second place tie with Montreal last time the teams met, but have not won a game in regulation since that second place tie with Montreal the last time the teams met. In fact, they have lost 6 of 7 games overall heading into this one, as the game primer brings up, which would leave their record at 0-1-1-5. Blair Turnbull was credited with 8 hits against Vancouver on Thursday. She has only had more hits twice in her PWHL career, 9 on March 8th, 2024 against Montreal, and 9 on May 10th, 2024 in the playoffs against Minnesota. She has more than 2 hits in just 2 of her 14 other games this season. The Sceptres captain recorded her only multi-point game of the season in her last game in Montreal with 2 assists. All right, that brings us to our goaltending and coaching matchup. But I should mention records for the current season head-to-head just before we jump into that and all that jazz. Toronto was 2-1-1. Montreal 2-1-0-0 for the current season heading in to this showdown. Toronto went against Montreal last season, and that was head-to-head. All right, let's meet our head coaches and get down to our goaltending and officiating crew. Here we go. The head coach of the Montreal Victoire are Corey Chevry. If I pronounced the name wrong, I apologize. Maybe when I'm done recording this, we'll probably edit it, so we will see. But I apologize if I pronounced Corey Chevry's last name and first name wrong. Apologies in advance if I did so. On the other side of the ice, the bench opposite Montreal would be bench boss Troy Ryan, head coach of the Toronto Sceptres. In the first 2 seasons between Corey Chevry and Troy Ryan, Toronto is not a bad records for the teams considering where they were this season heading in to the matchup at 6-3-0. So, who is getting to go between the pipes? It's time to go between the pipes. Over on the Toronto side, between the pipes, we will go with number 1, Reagan Kirk. She will get the start for Toronto. On the bench, if needed, in backup is number 29, Elaine. What about opposite Reagan Kirk and Elaine Shuley? Well, on the bench, opposite Elaine Shuley, number 30, Sandra Abstrider. There we go. I think I got it right there. Apologies, Sandra, if I pronounced the last name wrong. I think I did, but I hope I didn't do that. If I did, I apologize. And taking the reins in goal opposite Reagan Kirk, give it up Montreal for number 35, Anne-Renee Desbiens. It's Anne-Renee Desbiens versus Reagan Kirk in goal on this big night in PWHL history where all 8 teams play on the same night. We'll touch on those final scores besides our game in just a moment. But of course, we invite you to stick with us for that. Before we go to our first break, the referees for Wednesday's contest were Jack Hennigan and Elizabeth Mantha, wearing the numbers 44 and 15 in black and white stripes. The lines person, as they call them in the women's game, of course, in the men's game, they're referred to as linesmen. They were Sophie Thompson, wearing the number 75. Heidi Niskanen also was an official here as a lines person, or linesmen. But there was no number when she began officiating in this game. Speaking of that, I would go with number 0. I'm not technically sure what number Heidi was, but that's okay. We'll move right along. And speaking of moving right along, we are going to take our first break of the program, but before we do, this game was slated to start at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, 5:30 p.m. Central, 3:30 Pacific, 4:30 p.m. Mountain, and the other times, of course, in the UK, 11:30 in the UK at night, and 30 minutes after midnight in Sweden and France. It did start 8 minutes after those timelines. The puck dropped 8 minutes after those timelines in front of 8,018 fans in attendance at the Place Bell Center, rather known as Place Bell, I should say. And it was quite a good one. Depends on who you ask, though. When we continue on the program, we will dive into the game, first period all the way to the third period, dive into the power play, shots on goal by period, penalty kill as a result of the power play, and the 3 stars when we return. So folks, we hope you will stick with us. And as you do, I want to remind you that we have continuing coverage of hockey heading into the Olympic break. Unfortunately, though, we will not be covering the Olympic break, but we do have a little bit of Penguin hockey coming your way, so be sure to stick with us for that. As for the women's hockey side of things, we will continue that conversation in just a moment. Stick with us. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Take another look with Gerda Felix and Melanie Taddeo Malo, two powerful women of diverse backgrounds having genuine, unique, and uncomfortable conversations that everyone needs to have. Join Melanie and Gerda for conversations about what is missing from human connections.
Hi, Scott. It's Ali here. I just wanted to mention that I'm really enjoying the show and I'm really enjoying what you're putting together. And I wanted to just say I'm enjoying being a part of it as well. So please keep up the phenomenal work and make sure you guys keep this podcast going because it really suits you well.
CNT Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on CNT Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on CNT Radio.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Welcome back, folks, to PWHL Recap. My name is Scott McGregor. The topic of conversation, Toronto versus Montreal. Meeting number 4 of 5 in the 2025-2026 regular season. Season number 3 in PWHL history. In case you are not aware, the Minnesota Frost, formerly known as PWHL Minnesota, are currently 2-time defending Walter Cup champions. But we'll talk about the Minnesota Frost when we go around the league a little bit later in the program. It is time for the game breakdown of our show. But in case you missed it earlier, just for a brief recap, our officiating crew is Jack Hennigan and Elizabeth Mantha, along with Sophie Thompson and Heidi Niskanen. Heidi, if I pronounced the name wrong, apologies in advance. Our head coaches are Troy Ryan and Corey Chevry. Hopefully I got that correct. Again, apologies just like the officiating crew if I pronounced the name wrong. And our goaltending matchup, Reagan Kirk versus Anne-Renee Desbiens. All right, here we go. Let's get into it, shall we? We begin with our penalty takers. In this contest, there were 2 penalties, 4 actually, taken by the same player for different calls. The first penalty went to Renata Fast, 2 minutes for holding at 12 minutes and 9 seconds. Toronto goes to the game's first PK of the evening. Ali Monroe would send Toronto to the game's second PK of the evening, as a little later she goes to the box for cross-checking. 2-minute penalty to Ali Monroe for cross-checking at 13 minutes 10 seconds. Toronto would kill both of those penalties off before Natalie Milankova scores her fourth, goal of the season. Skylar Irving picks up the primary assist, her third of the season. Dara Gregg, her second assist of the season. Those were number 96, 88, and 17, combining for a goal. 1-0 Montreal at 16 minutes and 33 seconds in. The Montreal Victoire did not take a penalty in the first period of play, so despite not connecting on the power play, it was Natalie with her 4th goal of the season that put Montreal in front 1-0 at the end of one period of play. Speaking of that, the score after 20 minutes of play would be Victoire 1, Sceptres 0. They also would be outshot by Montreal 14-6 for the game and after period number 1 in terms of shots on goal. Let's go to period number 2. In period number 2, a little bit more of the same. Toronto taking 2 penalties. Only this time Montreal connects. However, before they connect on 2 Toronto penalties, they take a penalty of their own as Skylar Irving to the box for Montreal. 2 minutes for high sticking at 8 minutes and 27 seconds. Later in the game's second period, however, this is where Toronto's penalties lead to TLPPG's 2 out of 4 opportunities they get. The first one, Ali Monroe, this time leading the charge for Toronto, as she takes a 2-minute penalty for delay of game at 13 minutes and 36 seconds. Renata Fast follows at 16-minute 26-second mark of the second period, taking a 2-minute minor penalty for interference. Let's go back to the Ali Monroe delay of game penalty. I wonder who scores on the power play for Montreal in this go around. Well, it would be none other than MPP herself, Captain Clutch. Marie-Philippe Poulin puts Montreal ahead 2-0 on the power play with her 7th goal of the season. Laura Stacey, 6 assists of the season. She had the primary assist there. Nicole Gosling picks up her 4th assist of the season. Time of the goal, power play goal, 14 minutes, 25 seconds. That came after the 13-minute, 36-second penalty to Ali Monroe of the Toronto Sceptres. At the 18-minute, 6-second mark of the second period, want to make sure I didn't say third period there, Cheyenne Darkangelo put Montreal on top 3-0. Speaking of that, Cheyenne Darkangelo not only put the third and final goal of this game and second and final power play goal of the game, but she also picked up her 3rd goal of the season as a result of putting up the 3-0 lead for Montreal. Haley Scamora picks up her 5th assist of the season. Maggie Flaherty picking up her 3rd assist of the season. Montreal ultimately will win this game 3-0, as in the 3rd period, I should say, no goals and no penalties were called against either Toronto or Montreal. So the shots on goal after 40 in favor of the Victoire, 25-15. They outshot Toronto by a final tally of 11-9. But in the end, at the third period, it was Toronto who had the last laugh despite being outshot for the game, 31-22. Toronto had the last laugh in shots as they outshot Montreal 7-6 in the third period of play. Ultimately, though, Anne Renee Desbiens on her bobblehead night picks up her third shutout of the season and ninth win this regular season. Congratulations to her, and congratulations to the Victoire, finishing on a very high note, considering where they are and considering where Toronto is. The records as the game went final, and as per where we stand right now, Montreal is 7-3-0-5. Toronto 4-1-3-8. Toronto will now face off against when we come out of the break, the Oulmpic break, they will now face off against the 4-1-2-7 Seattle Torrent when we come out of the break. And the New York Sirens, who are fourth place right now, will take on the 7-3-0-5 Montreal Victoire. New York, currently, their record, 7-3-0-5. Well, actually 0-6. 7-0-3-6, I should say. That sounds much better. 7-3-0-6. There we go. That sounds more better. Anyways, more on the standings a little bit later. It is time now on our show, before we get to the power play and penalty kill, to take a look at the stars of the game, the 3 stars of the game. And it went to Victoire forward. Your third star went to Victoire forward, number 96, Natalie Milinkova, I should say. Okay, I'm getting there. Your second star went to the captain of the Montreal Victoire, also known as Captain Clutch, number 29, Marie-Philippe Poulin, 1 goal, no assist. Same thing for Natalie Milinkova, if I got that right. And your first star might have been number 35 tonight on your bobblehead or in your program, I should say, on that Wednesday night. But at the end of that night, she was number 1 in your heart. Brick wall, as I like to call her, Anne Renee Desbiens is your first star. No surprise, it was all Montreal in the 3 stars of the game. But if you have a difference of opinion, let us know on our Discord server or our WhatsApp group, or even at email, sportsforbeginnerspodcast 8231@gmail.com, who you think should be a 3-star of the game, also recipient of our play of the game, and of course, women's hockey player of the game, etc., etc. We are going to take a timeout when we continue on PWHL Recap. It is time to discuss the play of the game, look around the league, get into our breaking news on the day of the 8-game history-making day before the Olympic send-off, which is currently underway. The break is currently underway for the women. And of course, our women's hockey player of the game is also coming up. And when we do our look around the league, we will also go into our standings, at which point we will be sharing the screen to give you a look at who stands where at the Olympic break. PWHL Recap continues on Sports for Beginners in just a few short moments. So be sure you stick with us. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment. Hey Pens fans, this is Scott McGregor, host of Sports for Beginners, On the Ice and Behind the Benches, and co-host of On the Ice and Behind the Benches, host of also Weekly in Sports, and many of the other programs on Sports for Beginners. Join me after Join me every week after select Penguins hockey games over the course of the week for Penguins Weekly Recap, a new kind of show airing weekly on Sports for Beginners. Next season, we wanted to try and do it this year, but we'll do it next season. That's Penguins Weekly Recap, coming soon to Sports for Beginners, the podcast. You won't want to miss it. See you there, Penguin fans.
Good afternoon, Scott. I'm really enjoying the podcast as per usual, so please keep up the podcast. You've got a great thing going. Keep it going, please. My favorite traditions, I just like to follow sports, on Halloween. I don't typically have I do like chocolate, but I'm not really big on the traditional Halloween side. Please feel free to play this on a future episode. We'll talk soon.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
Welcome back to PWHL Recap on Sports for Beginners, the podcast. We're talking Victoire and Sceptres, matchup number 4 of 5 games between the two squads. Both 8 squads in the PWHL will meet at least 5 times this year. And Montreal and Toronto are no exception. They have now met heading into the Oulmpic break 4 times. They will only meet one more time this regular season. One quick thing to note here before we get to the play of the game from the primer. For the season series all time, Montreal leads Toronto this regular season 5-4, heading into action in terms of points before the Oulmpic break. In the season series for 2025. Toronto, however, leads the season series head-to-head all-time, 25-17. So Toronto does have more points against Montreal all-time, but Montreal is currently leading in points in the 2025-2026 season series, 5-4 in points. Wow, okay. So we continue on here. Just wanted to note that down quickly. It is time for our play of the game. Play of the game, just like the 3 stars of the game, if you've listened to my Penguins post-game shows, which, by the way, as we enter the Oulmpic break for the NHL, this edition of Penguins post-game coming up after this show will be a homestand/road trip recap, in which case we will do the game puck of the game, 3 stars of the game, shake of the game, all within the show. We won't be worrying too much about the officiating crew, and we will only go around the league when we get to our Buffalo Sabre game recap. As I mentioned in the opening of this show, we are recording this on Thursday, February 5th, 2026, and the game that we are talking about is a game that went down in the PWHL on Wednesday night, January 28th, 2026, when all 8 teams in the PWHL, for the first time in history of the league, competed on the same night. Here we go. What's good enough for my play of the game? Well, if we had a guest on our show, they would get the honor to do play of the game. But since we don't have a guest on our show, especially our post-game show like this one, it comes courtesy of the host. And if you listen to the Penguins post-game shows, by the way, they are brought to you by, just like for the PWHL, although we don't have any sponsors, they are brought to you by their respective sponsors for the PWHL coverage, as well as for Pittsburgh Penguins hockey. Here on Sports for Beginners, they are brought to you by the respective sponsors on the Penguins TV and radio network, as well as the opponent of the Penguins TV and radio network, respective sponsors. What's good enough for my women's play of the game, play of the game in this one? Well, I didn't see most of this game, but I did catch the game following this one on TSN, which was Minnesota and Vancouver. But if I had to pick a play of the game, I would say give me the goal by Marie-Philippe Poulin. I thought that there was a nice little pass there by Nicole Gosling and Laura Stacey. Laura got the pass from Nicole Gosling. That was Laura Stacey. She got the pass from Nicole Gosling and set up a pretty nice shot that Marie-Philippe Poulin just does not miss and is able to blank Reagan Kirk without a second thought. So that's good enough for my play of the game. If you have a difference in opinion, as we mentioned during the 3 stars segment, you can send us a email, sportsforbeginnerspodcast 8231@gmail.com, or connect with us on our Facebook page as well as our Instagram. Sorry, not Instagram. We don't have an Instagram. Well, you can connect with me on Instagram there if you want to do that. And you already do know me. Some of you do, some of you do not. That's okay. You can also connect with us on WhatsApp, mainly for these types of post-game segments. Better to do them during the games. I know we're recording this a couple of days after that game went final, as well as the other games, but we're making do with what we can. So with that said, check out our Discord server, our WhatsApp group chat, all that kind of jazz as well, so that you can never miss an episode. And be sure you are subscribed to our shows so you don't miss an episode, bonus, season, whatever it may be. But with the play of the game out of the way, it's time to go ahead and take a look. Not necessarily yet at our women's hockey player of the game, that coming up shortly, but it's time to take a look at what else went down on this historic night for the PWHL. And as we do that, while we are in a shared screen, we will bring up where the records for each of the 8 PWHL teams, including Toronto and Montreal, stand at the Oulmpic break. So the other 4 games that went down included the Montreal Victoire. Sorry, that was the game we're talking about. Montreal beating Toronto 3-0 in shutout fashion. The other 4 games were Boston versus New York, Ottawa versus Seattle, and Minnesota versus Vancouver. Only one of those other 3 games out of the 4 that were playing out on this night, Wednesday, January 28, 2026, managed to go the distance and into a shootout. That game took place at the Tosonga Center in Lowell, Massachusetts, where the Boston Fleet knocked off the New York Sirens by a final score of 4-3. Boston with the number 4, New York with 3 goals. Boston wins 4-3 in the shootout. As we mentioned, our game, Montreal beat Toronto 3-0. It was the only shutout of the evening, as the other games ended with Ottawa beating Seattle 4-2 at TD Place, and Minnesota scored 3 first-period goals, ultimately scoring 1 more goal to beat Vancouver 4-1. Went to a shootout and lost 4-3. The other 3, Toronto, Seattle, and Vancouver, each lost in regulation. Toronto in shutout fashion, 3-0 in favor of Montreal. Seattle by a 2-goal lead, and Vancouver lost by a 3-goal lead as Minnesota beat them 4-1. While we stay in shared screen, we bring up the standings, and here's where we sit heading into the break. In first place, we have the Boston Fleet with a record 8 wins, 2 overtime losses, and 2 losses. They have 30 points, and just 16 games remaining are the Toronto Sceptres, who are at a record as they sit in 7th place, 4-1-3-8. They will play the 8th place Seattle Torrent at a record of 4-1-2-7. Seattle has only played 14 games, just like Boston. They have 16 games remaining. Vancouver, Toronto, and Ottawa have each played 16 games, and they have 14 games remaining. Toronto's record, as we mentioned, 4-1-3-8 going into the break. They sit at number 6. going into the Olympic break. In spot number 5 of the PWHL is the Ottawa Charge at a record 4-5-0-7. The New York Sirens sit in 4th place in the standings with a record 7-0-3-6. Montreal's record, as we mentioned early on, 0-5. And they sit in spot number 3. Both they and Minnesota have only 15 games remaining and have played 15 games. Minnesota, by the way, is second and right behind the Boston Fleet by just 2 points. They have a record of 7-2-3-3. Boston's record 8-2-2-2. Boston has 30 points, Minnesota with 28, Montreal with 27, the Sirens with 24, Ottawa with 22, Vancouver with 19 points, Toronto has 17, and of course, Seattle with 16 points. So we go Boston all the way down to Seattle. Well, actually, we're going to talk about that before we go to the break. But anyways, we will talk about the news surrounding the New York Sirens, specifically that news that was brought out on the big day when both the New York Sirens, Boston Fleet, Minnesota Frost, Vancouver Golden Eyes, Seattle Torrent, Ottawa Charge, Toronto Sceptres, and Montreal Victoire all played on the same night. What kind of news are we referring to? Find out after the quick timeout. But before we get there, let's get to our women's hockey player of the game. And for me, the women's hockey player of the game for me, we're going to do it on both sides. So for me, that's going to go to puck stopper / bobblehead recipient Anne Renee Desbiens. I thought Anne Renee Desbiens was just absolutely unbeatable. She was absolutely stunning in goal on Wednesday night, and she just had a really great game. She really did. On the Toronto Scepters side, we'll get to some honorable mentions after the break, but on the Toronto Scepters side, despite no goals being scored, I'm going to go with Maggie Connors for my women's hockey player of the game. Maggie, although she didn't have any hits in this game, was a -1, didn't really see the face-off dot. She at least had 3 shots on goal, and I really like those. Maybe I like the first 2 shots, but the third shot, I don't know. I'm gonna have to watch this game back while the Olympic break is going on, and maybe see what I can pick up when Maggie Connors had the puck. But Maggie and Anne Renee Desbiens are the Women's Hockey Player of the Game recipients. Honorable mentions for this award coming up after this timeout. And following the timeout, we will segue to closing out the show with our news surrounding the New York Sirens, mainly Taylor Girard, as well as who's next for Toronto, who's next for Montreal, who's next for PWHL Recap, and what's next for the podcast. Spoiler alert, we talked about it as we were coming into the break. Find out more about it after the break. And a word from our friends at Sienna T Radio, making your day brighter one song at a time. We're back after this to wrap it up for PWHL Recap. Don't go anywhere. There's more great conversations and content right around the corner. Sports for Beginners will be right back in a moment.
Sienna T Radio will never give you up. They will never let you down, nor will they run around or desert you. So join Nick Astley for The Melting Pot every Saturday on Sienna T Radio. Hang on a minute. He's not Nick Astley. Oh, jings, I've done it wrong. Anyway, just join Nick for The Melting Pot on Sienna T Radio.
Now, let's take you back to the action. To the rink and field we go. We find Scott McGregor.
We got Pens and Sabres coming up on Penguins post-game, as well as, of course, a lot of Penguins hockey to talk about here on Sports for Beginners, the podcast, which is why this edition of Penguins hockey on Sports for Beginners, if it goes up on the ice and behind the benches, is called Penguins Postgame Presents Homestand / Road Trip Recap. But before we talk about that, we gotta wrap this one up. Penguins and the Sabres coming up in about an hour, 1 minute and 20 seconds from now. Pre-game show just about set to get started with our good buddy Paul Staggerwald and, of course, Brian Metzer and all the gang that I listen to on WXDX FM Pittsburgh. But all things considered, let's continue talking women for a little bit. We mentioned we're going to talk about honorable mentions for the Women's Hockey Player of the Game, gifted to Maggie Connors and Anne-Renee Desbiens of the Toronto Sceptres and, of course, the Montreal Victoire. But before we do, there was some breaking news on the day of the ultimate send-off, as the PWHL would call it, and one player in particular. That player is Taylor Girard. The Professional Women's Hockey League announced that a 4-game suspension assessed to New York Sirens forward Taylor Girard has been reduced from 4 games to 3 games. The decision follows an appeal by the PWHL Players Association, the PWHPA, and an internal hearing which PWHL Executive Vice President of Hockey Operations Jana Hefford she served as the hearing officer and concluded that a reduction to 3 games was appropriate following a review of all video replays and submissions from the Players Association and Girard herself. Girard was suspended following an on-ice altercation at the conclusion of the game on January 18th, 2026, against the Montreal Victoire. Per Rule 72.10 of the PWHL rulebook, Montreal and New York will be clashing on Thursday night, February 26, 2026. And speaking of that, before we dive more into this news, we will actually have that for you on our next edition of PWHL Hockey Talk here on PWHL Recap on Sports for Beginners. I'd like to take a moment to say honorable mentions to the Toronto Sceptres side for the Women's Hockey Player of the Game, which went to Maggie Connors, in case you missed it. Go out to Sceptres goaltender Megan Kirk. Not necessarily a great game by her, but I still feel like she deserves some flowers. She made 28 saves on 31 shots. Yeah, she gave up 3 goals, 2 of them on the power play, 1 at even strength. But if Toronto played their cards right, they probably wouldn't have been shut out on this historic night for the PWHL, where all 8 teams played on the same night. We also want to give an honorable mention to Captain Blair Turnbull. She didn't win too many face-offs, but she had at least a shot on goal in this one. Oh, and also Emma Maltese with 2 hits, 2 shots on goal. She had about 5 wins and 10 opportunities on the face-off. Jay Downey Landry also going to get some flowers here, as well as Amanda Boulier and Cheyenne Darkangelo. And how about, she had a pretty good game. Only 1 goal in the game, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. Let's get to some post-game comments, beginning with the Toronto side of things, before we look ahead in our schedule. Montreal captain MPP herself said after the game, on the game and the Oulmpic send-off, "We knew this game was going to be difficult physically and mentally. I think the players here in Montreal were super excited to finish strong and to use the crowd energy that was behind us on Wednesday night." She said tonight, but I'm going to say Wednesday night, as we are recording this a couple of days after the game. All the girls were ready to play 60 minutes. We're really happy with where we're at after 15 games. And it was great to be on the ice at the end, receiving the love from our fans for our path toward the Olympic Games. Head coach Corey Chevry picks up where where she were also being asked on the team's first half of the season and before the Olympic break, saying, quote, I am really satisfied with our defensive game. I think leading the league in the least amount of goals against is something that we can be proud of, but probably something that not everybody would talk about. So that has been a really great spot for us, along with the depth. Being able to be hard to play against has been great. Our penalty kill has been great. Our power play has been going up and up. So overall, I'm pretty satisfied with the first 15 games. Sceptres alternate captain Renata Fast, on the team averaging 4 penalties a game, said, on the flip side, I think we need to generate more power plays for ourselves as well. Obviously, we want to stay out of the box, but I think we're a team that is confident in our penalty kill, and we want to play a little bit on the edge. When you play that way, you're going to take some penalties. It's just managing the ones that maybe we don't want in the offensive zone, things like that. But I think at the end of the day, when it comes to special team battles, we need to work a lot harder to generate power play opportunities. Referring to Emma Maltese, Coach Troy Ryan of the Sceptres said on the game, it's frustrating the spot that we're in right now. In the second half after the Olympic break, we're going to have to find a way to climb out of it. Even just briefly having a conversation with Emma Maltese and Renata, offensively, we've just got to do more difficult things. I thought there was not a lot of traffic in front of Anne-Renee Desbiens, a lot of one and done offense when you're just settling for a wrist shot at the top of the circle with no net drive or no traffic and giving them some easy breakouts in transition. We've just got to be a little bit more difficult to play against. A couple of notables here as we stay on the shared screen. Montreal stays undefeated at Place Bell this season, setting a new team record with their 6th straight win at their primary home venue. The Victoires' 6-1-0-1 overall record in home games gives them a league leading win percentage of 833. Wow. Okay. Interesting. Toronto has lost 7 of their last 8 games. They are 0-1-1-6 since beating Montreal at the Bell Center on December 27th, 2025. They scored just 10 goals in that stretch and allowed 27 goals against. The Sceptres have suffered back-to-back shutout losses and 3 in their last 6 games. They had been shut out just 3 times in their 64 regular season games prior to this stretch. Their first 64 regular season games prior to this stretch. Toronto has gone 131 games, or 131 minutes and 50 seconds without a goal in their last 3 games in January, after going 131 minutes and 23 seconds without a goal across their first 3 games of the month. Wow. Okay. Anne-Renee Desbiens has also become the first goaltender to win 9 games this season and second to record 3 shutouts following Boston's Aaron Frankel. This was the 8th time in 13 starts she has allowed fewer than 2 goals, lowering her league-leading goals against average to 1.15 and raising her league-leading save percentage 54 before the Olympic Winter Games, where she will represent Canada. All right. So a lot to unpack here, but still quite a couple of hockey games left to go in the season. And speaking of that, let's go now and take a look as we proceed to wrap things up here. And take a look at next up for the Victoire. Next up for Montreal, they will take on the New York Sirens as a quick road trip pit stop on February 26th. 2026 at 7 p.m. Eastern. We will have that for you here on Sports for Beginners as our next PWHL recap. After that, they will head home to Place Bell. Where they will take on the Minnesota Frost on Sunday at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Sunday, March 1st, 2026. Tuesday, March 3rd, once again, they will see Toronto This time the game will be from Coca-Cola Coliseum, and it will be played at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Montreal and Toronto will meet for the final time this regular season, and that goes down on Tuesday night, March 3rd, 2026. Then at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, Montreal and Ottawa do battle at TD Place in Ottawa to wrap up a 2-game road trip that will begin in Toronto and end in the nation's capital of Canada on Wednesday, March the 11th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. They begin a 2-game homestand following that, as they will see Boston on Sunday, March 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Then Thursday night, March 19th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, they welcome in the Seattle Torrent. Meanwhile, for the Toronto Sceptres, following and before they meet with Montreal once again, they will continue their current road trip following the Oulmpic break, which is now 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games. They're down to 2 games in their 5-game road trip, where they have lost 6-4, 5-0, and now 3-0 to Vancouver and Montreal on a back-to-back night. Well, not really back-to-back night, but you get the picture. I didn't really have any context there. Moving on. On February 27th, that's Friday, 2020, they will play the Seattle Torrent from Climate Pledge Arena, home of the Seattle Torrent, and of course, home of the NHL's Seattle Kraken at 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, they will take on Vancouver from the Pacific Coliseum. That is Sunday, March 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern. Toronto will then face Montreal at Coca-Cola Coliseum to begin a 3-game homestand in which they will see Montreal, Minnesota, and Seattle to open up early March into mid-March. They will start with Vancouver road game at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on March 1st. Face Montreal Tuesday night, March 3rd, 20. Then on Sunday, March 8th at 12 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, they will take on the Minnesota Frost from Coca-Cola Coliseum to play game 2 of 3 in a homestand they are in. Then Sunday, March 15th at 1 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time, they will take on the Seattle Torrent to close out their 3-game homestand at home before they head to Boston in a home and home that will begin on Tuesday, March 17th at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time from Agganis Arena in Boston, Massachusetts. Boston will then head to Coca-Cola Coliseum to open up a 2-game homestand for Toronto as they face off against Boston and Vancouver. Both of those times will be one last time, as they do not face Boston or Vancouver down the stretch to the end of the year. Vancouver's game from Coca-Cola Coliseum drops the puck at 1 p.m. Eastern on Sunday, March 2026. March 27th, it is the Boston Fleet versus the Toronto Sceptres at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can catch all the Boston action in the Boston area on, and if you are in Canada, you can either catch the action on Sportsnet, TSN, or CBC, and even on Prime, specifically during Prime games on Tuesday nights. Up next for us on PWHL Recap, following the Oulmpic break, we will talk New York and Montreal. Montreal and New York will meet one last time down the stretch, as they will not face New York as we jump into the ending area of the regular season. When exactly will they face New York for the final time? That really remains to be seen, but I would think it's probably March 28th. I think that's probably it. But when we talk to you next on PWHL Recap, we will be talking to you after the game for Montreal and New York, which is on Thursday night, February 26th, 2026, live from the Prudential Center in Newark, New Jersey, home of the NHL's New Jersey Devils. Speaking of the NHL and the New Jersey Devils, time now to set the scene for what's coming up on the podcast. But in case you missed it earlier, the next PWHL recap will be between the New York Sirens and the Montreal Victoire. Greg Fargo versus Corey Shrevry they are next in our matchups on PWHL Recap. Montreal Victoire versus the New York Sirens. Greg Fargo versus Corey Shrevry. Next time on PWHL Recap. Coming up on Sports for Beginners, the Penguins had a 6-game winning streak. Right now, that is a losing streak. What will the Penguins' record be heading into the Olympic break? Where do they currently stand heading into the break? Are they in a good spot? Find out all those answers on our upcoming coverage of Penguins postgame. That will do it for us here today on the PWHL Recap show for Sports for Beginners, the podcast. We thank everyone for coming out to join us. As we always remind you here on Sports for Beginners, the podcast, it is not goodbye. It is always, and I mean always, until next time. For everything that I mentioned, including our next PWHL recap, which will be the Sirens and the Victoire. Next time on PWHL Recap, my name is Scott McGregor signing off saying Victoire win 3-0 over the Toronto Sceptres. They'll look to win the season series on March 3rd when the two teams clash for the final time following our Olympic break. PWHL is on the Olympic break and the NHL is not far behind. Find out all the final scores on the next edition of Penguins Postgame coming up right after this game. But for PWHL content, that is it for this one. Thank you very much for being with us. Would love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. Victoire win. The Victoire win it 3-0 over the Toronto Sceptres. And this is Scott McGregor saying, ice time always earned. We will see you again after the Olympic break and after Sirens versus Victoire. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the Olympics, and we'll talk to you ahead of Sceptres versus Torrent, breaking down that game between the Montreal Victoire and the New York Sirens. Until then, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much for listening to Sports for Beginners. If you would like to learn more about the show, you can visit the podcast Facebook page or visit the official website. You can also send us an email at sportsforbeginnerspodcast8231@gmail.com. As we always remind you, it is not goodbye, it is until next time. Well, hey there, folks. Your host of Sports for Beginners, the podcast, here with you. It is Scott, and this is a quick little testament of our program, letting you know what you can expect on our podcast coming up soon. Our PWHL recap continues. Following the Olympic break, we will be covering the Victoire versus the Sirens. That is on February the 26th, 2026. Look forward to seeing you then. We will also be covering Championship Sunday. Our fellow host, Thomas McGregor, will have that for you on Sports for Beginners following our recap show we did today between the Sceptres and the Victoire. So hopefully you can catch both of those shows when they launch. Maybe this recording is part of that show. You never really know. Our Penguins post-game show coverage continues in 2026 as we continue to recap a couple more games in the NHL for the Pittsburgh Penguins, including tonight's game against the Blackhawks, as well as the games this weekend and into next week as the NHL prepares for their Olympic break to begin. And of course, football content continues. We could have a Super Bowl show. This is just a quick reminder that tomorrow, before we record our game recap show, I will be in the studio to to begin Season 2 of Weekly in Sports in podcast format. This will be before we do the game recap show to recap the Penguins versus the Blackhawks, which goes down tonight at 7 p.m. Eastern. And with that all being said, we invite you to join us for the beginning of Season 5 of Sports for Beginners, beginning in 2 weeks' time at the start of February 2026, specifically when we begin spring training. Find out what's in store on episode 1 of season 5 of the podcast when we bring that to you at a date to be determined. But one thing's for sure, it will definitely be before first pitch is thrown to kick off the Blue Jays spring training schedule for 2026. That's all for now. If you like what you've heard in this special update on content, please consider subscribing to the podcast so you never miss an episode of content, bonus content, season content, whatever. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, Weekly in Sports with Scott. And of course, feel free to subscribe to the podcast Sports for Beginners and Weekly in Sports on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, or for Sports for Beginners, wherever you listen to podcasts. We're also available on Facebook, where you can catch many of our updates like this one, and you can send us an email at sportsforbeginnerspodcast8231@gmail.com, as well as connect with us on Discord. But if you have issues with Discord, please feel free to utilize, yes, I said utilize, our WhatsApp group chat. Not a lot of the group chat has been added, but we have our announcements. We have a section for the Blue Jays, a section for Buffalo, more sections, I should say, as groups still to come in the Sports for Beginners podcast network. I should say the Sports for Beginners Network. And I should let you know that PWHL Recap, although Thomas's version is part of the On the Ice and Behind the Benches network, my version is also part of the Sports for Beginners podcast network, as well as the other shows that I do and that Thomas does. Dolphins Postgame, Bills Postgame, and Penguins Postgame are all part of the Sports for Beginners network, no matter who they may be hosted by. Myself or Thomas, also Penguins Postgame and Bills Postgame, as well as Dolphins Postgame, are also shows in partnership and collaboration with On the Ice and Behind the Benches. See you around, everybody, and make sure you check us out. All right, until then, sports fans.